Thank you for attending this growth management webinar. My name is Jeff Picher, and I am an arborologist with Rainbow Tree Care. This is just a little bit of housekeeping. This is worth 1 CEU. This presentation will take approximately about 45 minutes, the PowerPoint, and then we're going to allocate about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer some of your questions. And if you look in the lower right-hand section, you'll see there's a dialog box where you can actually, if you didn't previously register your ISA certification number, you can place that in there right now with your name. And also you can type in questions. And at the end of the webinar, time permitting, we'll go through them. And also you can see that this is going to be recorded, so you can look at this in the future at your own leisure. I am a part-time bass fisherman when I'm not out there working with arborists like yourself. I am a follower of the scarlet and gray. And one thing that we do at Rainbow is we share all of our expertise. I'm part of a technical support team, and if I get a question posed to me where I don't know what the answer is, I have the luxury of going to my fellow technical support members. And one thing that we don't do at Rainbow, we don't roll the dice and guess. We put our heads together. We develop protocols for the various problems that arborists face in the landscape, and we share those protocols with you. And this is what I'm hoping that everyone will take home from this presentation. We're basically going to be talking about growth regulators. And so these are the areas where we're going to cover especially with the use of Cambistat. Cambistat has been around for several years. Originally, paclobutrazol, which is the active ingredient, was invented back about 40 years ago. And initially, it was developed as a fungicide, and they realized that it wasn't a very good fungicide. But one of the side effects that it had, it created stunted plants. And so at that point in time, they felt that it was not advantageous to stunt plants. But now look, paclobutrazol is used in the greenhouse business, it's used on golf courses, it's used in the tree care business, and also just recently it's being used as a foliar application to shrubs in the landscape. So we'll talk about how it saves money, how it reduces the need to prune on a regular basis, and especially when you've got a plant that is an indeterminate plant that just will continually grow, for example, like privet, or you're talking about forsythia. These plants will continue to grow, where determinate plants, for example, like say rhododendrons, they will just send up one flush a year, and so that's the difference between the two. And we'll also talk about how to promote this to your clients and how to convince them to try this product and maybe just do a small scale trial on certain tree species. And certain species react a little bit more favorably than others, and we can talk about that as well. Who is Rainbow Tree Care Scientific Advancements? We originally started out as Rainbow Tree Care, and currently we service quite a few clients in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. But originally Rainbow started back in the 70s when the founder, Tom Prosser, came up with a product called Arbortech. And Arbortech is a systemic fungicide that is used to prevent Dutch elm disease. And this is where his business started. And then since then, they've grown into a full-service tree care company. And the scientific advancements parts, what we do is we take all of the knowledge and all of the science out into the industry. We work with arborists, we work with landscape companies, and there's no secrets. We share our protocols, we share our expertise, we give technical support, whether it be one-on-one in the field or whether it be on the phone. We are here to help arborists serve their clients, and we always tout that we're going to, our products, whether it be equipment or products, are going to bring predictable results, and that's really what we're all about. So that's what we do, is we just don't sell something and ship it in a box and say, good luck, read the label. We are there to help, and that's one of my responsibilities as a technical support rep. I'm out in the field on a regular basis. I'm visiting clients and helping them and discussing some of their problems. There's a lot of problems out there, pest-related problems as well, and so we put our heads together. Also, the technical support team, we network and we collaborate with a lot of university researchers, pathologists, entomologists, and we just have a way of finding out what the answer is and what the solution might be. So what is Cambistat and what's the science of it? We'll just talk about, first we're going to cover the basics, and then we're going to talk about how it controls growth, why it does, how it reallocates energy within the plant, how to do the application, and there are some precautions. Cambistat works very, very well. However, you can overregulate certain plants that are very sensitive to it, so we'll discuss that as well, and then we'll talk about marketing. Here is the basics. Paclobutrazol is the active ingredient, and what basically it does, it inhibits the formation or the biosynthesis of gibberellic acid, and as we all know, gibberellic acid is essential and responsible for growth. And this is a type 2 growth regulator. You still get the same number of cells in the plant, but they're much smaller, and they just do not elongate. And depending on the plant and depending on the rate, we can get almost 40 to 60% growth reduction over 3 years. So really what this does, it does a couple of things. It increases the production of abscisic acid, and I always have difficulty pronouncing that word. And also what it'll do, it'll increase the production of chlorophyll, hence the deep dark green color that you often get using Cambistat. And then also it reduces the gibberellic production. So growth control, what does it do? Let's see the pictures. This is really where it's important. The before and after pictures, they speak 1,000 words. And you can see in this photograph, after 1 year of untreated growth, let's say this tree was treated, let's say in the summer, and then next spring, you would see the results about 6 to 9 months later, and you can see the growth reduction. Usually year 2, it really kicks in, and that's really where you see the best growth reduction. But what this is doing is the inner nodes are slightly smaller, and they're less elongated. And another response that you'll see, sometimes the foliage will be slightly smaller than normal. And so, and you can see in this example, here is a treated one on the left and untreated on the right. It gives the plant a much dense, bushier appearance. The foliage will be more finer, and so it'll give a nice fine appearance. Here's an example of silver maple. You can see the untreated control on the left. You've got these large inner nodes, you've got these large leaves, and the leaves on the right are almost 50% smaller, and it just gives that plant a finer appearance. This is black walnut. You can see also the color difference in these two branches. The inner node is shrunken, the color difference is definitely noticeable. And there's some other things that happen to the foliage itself. It becomes thicker, it becomes a little bit more durable, and that's also going to help with disease control. One of the best species that I've seen results on that really responds well are oaks, pin oaks, red oaks especially. And you can see it just makes that plant just look darker, greener, more compact, and just more desirable. And here's an example of Cambistat applied to taxus, but typically taxus, junipers, arborvitae, conifers in generally don't respond all that favorably, not favorably, but as much as, let's say, a deciduous tree or a shrub would. You're not going to get the 40 to 60% growth reduction. Oftentimes you'll only get maybe 10, 15, maybe 20% growth reduction. But also you'll see the color difference as well. I've treated some taxus that did not reduce the terminal growth all that much, but you would see the dark green foliage as a result. Here's a trial that I did in Wilmington, Delaware. I did this 2 years ago. And this is an Osage orange hedge. And this particular Osage orange, well, Osage oranges are trees, basically. They can get 30, 40, 50 feet high and equally as wide. But in this situation, this is an Osage orange hedge that is roughly about 5,000 feet in length. And it is pruned to 6-foot height and a 6-foot width. And this hedge is sheared probably 2 to 3 times a year. And if you've ever sheared Osage orange and you picked up the branches, you know that it's got multiple thorns throughout on the branch. But you can see in this photograph right here where I've got my cursor, this section and this section in here were treated with Cambistat. And you can see how tight the growth is, where the left and the right of that one section are the control. So the owner of this hedge was very thrilled because he's thinking he's going to save about 40 man-hours of labor and not having to prune this hedge that frequently. And here's a close-up, and you can see there's the treated on my left. Actually, it's holding it in my right hand, and then the untreated on my left. The one untreated section was about 18 to 24 inches in length versus like 3 or 4 inches of the treated, and also you notice the color difference as well. And these are where this is where this product is used primarily. A lot of utility companies, they'll make applications to situations like this, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to reduce the pruning frequency. If they don't have to get up there normally, depending on the plant species, they'll be there every 3, 4, 5 year cycles to keep those lines cleared. But this will extend the pruning cycle for the utility division. Also here, this is used in a landscape, whether it be a home or a commercial landscape. You've got these fairly formally shaped plants. They don't have much growing space, so you may have to get in there fairly frequently and shear them. The only way you're going to get in there to shear them is to get up on a step ladder, and we all know what happens, and we all know the risks of climbing step ladders with power tools. It just increases the potential for accidents. So this will slow down the growth rate. You will still have to prune, but you may not need to bring the power shears up. You may be able to use pole pruners. And this is another situation where Cambistat is used to control growth. Obviously these plants should have been placed in that location. They're too close to the buildings, so maybe the homeowner says, I don't want to remove them, I like the privacy, but then you want to reduce the pruning frequency. This would be a great situation. Here's another situation where you've got these trees planted up close to the building to sort of soften the building and put a little bit of shade on that building. However, you're going to have to keep the clearance, prune the branches away from the windows so they don't slap on the windows, and it creates some problems. So this is where you would use this. Also, we're seeing a lot of landscapes that are installed. Most landscapes are probably overplanted, in my opinion, and so maybe at first they look okay, and then after 3, 4, or 5 years they start to compete with each other. And there are some drawbacks to putting evergreens close together, especially if they're susceptible to some Rhizosphaera or some Radicline needlecast. If they're firs, that increases their chances of getting these foliar diseases. So use Cambistat in this situation, slow the growth rate down, and also you'll get a better leaf, and that will also be resistant to a lot of the foliar diseases. Another thing that Cambistat does, it reduces the growth trunk, the trunk growth, the diameter. It'll slow down that growth rate. And as you can see, after this tree was treated, you can see how the rings are much smaller in diameter compared to the untreated. So that's the benefit, especially when you've got these sidewalk trees. They're in these planting pits. You get the iron grates, and you know what happens in this situation. No one goes in there with a cutting torch to remove those rings, and eventually these iron grates wind up girdling the tree, and I've seen it a million times. Energy reallocation. How could slower growth, as you can read, benefit tree health? And so here's a theory that's sort of set up by Dan Herms at Ohio State. These trees have a certain amount of energy, and so what happens, most of that energy goes into the vegetative growth, shoot growth. Trees grow branches, they grow leaves. The leaves produce starches and sugars to feed the tree. And so it also, part of that energy goes into some other areas of the tree as well. But once we apply Cambistat, what we're doing is we're suppressing that vegetative growth. But the energy has to go somewhere. So when Cambistat is applied, it's applied as a soil application. It's taken up through the roots, up through the xylem, and it goes up. And what it does, it reduces the terminal growth in the upper part of the tree, in the shoot, but in the root growth, it does not. Actually, the energy that is not going towards vegetative growth goes into the production of fine fibrous roots. So you can see in that center column, the root growth will actually improve, and also the defense compounds. So what we use this for is in trees that are in compromised situation, planting pits, for example, and we've seen these planting pits, they're just too small, and so what we'll see is an increase of the fibrous roots. And here's the control tree in the pit, and here's the same tree with Cambistat treated on the right-hand side, much more fibrous root growth, able to what? Bring up more nutrients, able to bring up more soil moisture. And you can see this is 6 years after treatment. It works quite well. Pines typically do not have very good root systems, and you can see here's a difference done at University of Minnesota. The Cambistat treated one on the right, an air spade was used to expose these roots, and you can see there's a marked difference in the mass of roots. Then this was a trial that was done, I believe this was at Morton Arboretum, newly transplanted sugar maple. You can see here's the control on the left and the treated on the right. Yes, this was done at the Morton Arboretum by Gary Watson. And so what does that represent? What does that reflect? This is the same sugar maple. This is the untreated one on the left. There's the treated one on the right. You can see more compact crown, darker foliage, improved root system. So we're really doing this to help the tree roots. And then you can see there, nice close-up. Drought stress. One thing that abscisic acid does, it will actually close those stomates due to that higher level of abscisic acid. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to slow down the transpiration loss out of that tree, especially during a drought stress period. One thing it also does, it increases the thickness of the leaves. Cambistat also will increase the thickness of the cuticle, and it also will increase the number of trichome hairs that are on the surface of the leaf, and the more trichome hairs, it slows down the loss of moisture during drought periods. And there you can see the difference of those two right there. Other things that we'll do is we'll reduce the amount of scorch, and here's an example here on oak. You'll get the increased chlorophyll content, as we've seen, and also the leaves take on more of a shinier appearance. I've seen this also treating shrubs as well. Certain shrubs treated with Cambistat or the foliar applied Cambistat, which is called Trim Tech, will take on a more vibrant, shinier, glossy appearance, just more aesthetically pleasing. And also keep in mind, I've taken a lot of calls this year about fire blight, and if you haven't seen our protocol for fire blight, please email me. I would be more than happy to send it to you. Cambistat is part of that protocol, and what it's doing, it's slowing down that growth on that pear and making that new shoot less susceptible to the infection. So that is that's also another benefit as well. Bacterial leaf scorch, this was a trial that Bartlett tree experts did. We researched with them quite a bit, and here's a treated oak tree. There's no treatment. There's actually no control for bacterial leaf scorch. What we can only do is work with the symptoms and treat the symptoms. We cannot eliminate this. But here's an example. 1 year later, exactly the same tree before the Cambistat treatment. The whole theory is trying to develop the root system so you do not get the scorching that typically occurs like in July or in August with this problem. Urban tree stress. No wonder these trees, why do trees live 7 to 10 years? They've got too much stress. They've got heat. They've got compacted soil. They've got warm soil. Usually they're just not being maintained. They're not fertilized. They're not irrigated when they need it. And that's why trees are always under stress, at least the urban trees. Soil compaction, that is also important. When you're using Canvastat, it is ideal to use this in combination with some practices, and we'll talk a little bit about using the air spade to decompact the soil, because Canvastat is not the magic bullet. If you've got trees that are really under a lot of stress, you've got to address the compaction, increase the soil oxygen levels, increase your organic matter content. It's not a bad idea also to mulch that tree, because that mulch is going to do several things. It's going to moderate the soil temperature. It's going to control weeds, control moisture loss, and it's just going to break down eventually, and it'll incorporate and provide organic matter into that tree. So this is what we've got in the city, small planting pits, and usually the trees that are planted in these pits usually outgrow them in a very short period of time. And here's something a little bit better, a slightly raised pit, but look at it, it's 92 degrees at 10 o'clock in the morning in Fort Worth, Texas. And so you think those trees are losing moisture? Undoubtedly. This is the situation where you would want to use Canvastat. So what also we're trying to do is to reduce the pruning on these trees. So not only are you benefiting the roots by developing a fibrous root system, you're actually reducing the pruning cycles. And oftentimes these merchants, and I've been in many cities before, and they say that they like the trees, but they don't like the trees because people can't see their place of business. They can't see their signs. So maybe Canvastat might help that out and slow down the growth rate, because the cities don't have the funds to go out there and do annual pruning. They just don't have it. So this is what Canvastat can do for you, and we all know the benefits. And so the next thing is how do we apply it? Oh, I just want to talk about this tree. Some people refer to this as the Lazarus Tree. This was at Morton Arboretum, and you can see in that first photo in 1989, this was a declining white oak. And all arborists know once we see terminal dieback up in the crown of the tree, usually that's irreversible decline, and there's not much hope for that tree. So what happened here, some soil was replaced around this tree. They went in there, decompacted the soil, added in composted manure, I think it was, and Canvastat was used. And then, of course, these dead limbs were pruned out. And you can see this is where the tree came back from 89 to 2001, not a bad looking tree. And these are some more recent photos. This is what the tree looks right now. And you can see it is somewhat of a tufted looking tree. Eventually, you let that tree grow out, and you don't really want to just Canvastat it every 3 years. You want to eventually get that tree back to a point where the roots are feeding the tree, the roots are growing, the leaves are growing, and then the leaves are feeding the tree and giving that tree nourishment. One thing that you have to be careful of is trees that are very, very rapidly declining. They generally have a very poor response to any treatment. So what I would suggest doing is looking at the terminal growth of the tree, and if you can see that this tree is growing from like 12 inches a year to 3 inches to 2 inches to 1/4 of an inch a year, in my estimation, that's rapid decline, and you really want to find out what the cause is. Most likely it is a root problem. And once these trees decline, we all know what happens. Secondary invaders come in. I call them the recyclers. The borers come in, and they usually finish the tree off. But usually it's root-related, soil compaction, root loss. That is really that starts the whole spiraling down effect of tree decline. So you've got to alleviate that compacted soil. Be careful with herbicides, of course. Make sure you're adequately watering that tree, and during the summer you want to make sure that tree is getting at least 1 inch of water per week, hopefully more, but maybe this year we don't need much water in certain parts of the country. And also, it goes without saying, you do have to address the specific insect and disease issues and that's going to vary species to species. So the application, how do we apply this? One thing that you have to understand is chemostat is very, there are certain trees that are very sensitive to chemostat. And so one of the most important things that you have to do is accurately diagnose and identify the tree species. And the reason I say that, I'll give you an example. In the genus Acer, we've got Japanese maples, we've got red maples that are on the list, Norway maples, and let's say silver maples. Well, Japanese maples, they are extremely sensitive, and I do not recommend treating Japanese maples because they are somewhat dwarfed to begin with. I would go at the very low rate and maybe even cut that low rate in half. The rates are classified as A to F, A meaning the lowest and F meaning the highest. Silver maples are at the D or E rate, where red maples are at the B rate. So silver maples are resistant to chemostat, so we've got to use more. I was in a university, and they had an intern treat the maple trees with chemostat. Well, he thought a red maple was a silver maple and used the higher rate. And so what do you get as a result? Smaller leaves, tufted look. You get growth reduction for probably 2, 3, maybe even more, 4 years. So the point is, make sure you properly identify that tree before you go to the application guide and to decide which rate you have to use. But here's how we apply it. We use the Hti Soil Injector, and one of the reasons we use this is designed specifically for chemostat. It is so accurate. Inside this green box, there's a cylinder, and the cylinder can be filled with 1 to 250 milliliters of liquid. And the reason we have it accurate to the 1 milliliter is because that's how sensitive certain trees are to chemostat. You don't want to overregulate them. The other way we can do it is use the Basal Drench Kit on the right, and this way we have to mix up the batch for the specific tree, and this is just applied at the base of the tree. Very simple. Soil injection goes very quickly, takes 3 to 5 minutes per tree to do, and you're not going out to the drip line, you're staying in close to the root flare. No more than 1, maybe 2 feet out from the root flare is where the application is made. And the same thing with the basal drench. The basal drench is done right at the base of the tree, and that takes a couple of minutes. One of the reasons it can take longer, because you may have to do a root collar. You may have to pull back the soil, the sod, the mulch, and create a moat around the base of the tree, because you want to contain this surface application. You do not want this running off, going downhill, going on into the other parts of the garden or onto the turf. So here's where this system works really well. In this photograph, it's used with a motorized backpack, or it can be used with a truck-mounted sprayer, and that would probably be what most people would use it with. And the way this system works, you can see you push this fill button. This is connected to the sprayer, and once you push the fill button, it opens the valve, and there's a cylinder inside that fills up. As this cylinder fills up, there's a little guide, that bar that moves up through this slot, and this is 0, and this is 250 mils. Once you're at 250 mils, you release the left button, you push the right button, then it revalves the material, and using the pressure from your sprayer, pushes it into the ground. Here's the foot plate. Here's the probe at the tips. The probe is anywhere from 4 to 6 inches, and the reason it's that short because you don't want to go too deep. You want to go just right where the tree roots are located. Another feature of this system, it's got a resettable counter, so you have to make sure you don't want to overdose it. So you know you got to do 10 shots or 20 shots. You've got a counter. You don't have to remember. And so this is the other option that you have, is doing the soil drench. Very simple. The equipment is really, you're not making any investment at all in this. You can go to Home Depot and get a 5-gallon plastic bucket and do that. But this is a very simple drench kit. One of the prerequisites is to, again, pull the turf back, get to the root flare. And one thing you want to do is when you're making this application, you want to make two loops around the base of that tree. The reason I do that because I'm ensured that I get really, really good coverage and I make good, even application. Some of the precautions, like as I mentioned, you've got to make sure that you identify the tree and you want to make sure you follow the guidelines. If you have a tree species that's not on the guidelines, email me or call someone technical support and we'll be able to help. But this is what can happen. I mentioned earlier that leaves can be much smaller. Well, you can see how small these leaves are. This was a flowering dogwood that was treated several years ago. This is year 2 of Cornish, Florida, and you can see what it's done. The leaves are nice and dark. The leaves are nice and small, and way too small. One of the drawbacks is that the plant becomes woodier looking. But also there's some theory about Cambistat also enhancing flowering ability, and there's been some claim to that. I'm currently doing some trials on that right now to see if I can definitively make a statement that there are more flowers. And so also what you'll see is less foliage will actually not conceal a lot of the flowers. And here's an example of a Kusa dogwood that was treated with Cambistat in year 2. And you can see there's just tons of flowers on there. And there's very little vegetative growth, but there's a lot of bloom. So that might be a little bit overregulated in my opinion, but some people may like that look. Dose reductions. One thing that we have to do is make sure that the diameter of the tree, and that's really where we determine the dose. It's based upon the diameter of the tree. It's based upon the species of the tree, but also it's also based on restricted root zones. And for example, here are some trees. I'm not even sure what the variety is, but you can see these were pruned quite heavily. The trunk and the crown are not in the same ratio. So this is where you'd have to go with some rate reductions. Automatically you'd go in and reduce the rate by 25% because of this containerized root system. But then would you say I would probably reduce that crown is probably reduced about 50 to 60%, maybe even more so. So it takes a little bit of experience. It's nice to get a couple of people, a couple of arborists in on it when you're evaluating what percentage of the crown has been lost. So if you look at a tree and you see a storm has taken out 1/3 of the tree, you reduce the amount of Cambistat by 1/3. One thing I mentioned earlier about making sure you want to contain the surface that applied Cambistat. And here's an example where Cambistat was applied to that tree up in the top of the photo. And then if you look really carefully, you can see where it ran through the turf. It's not going to hurt the turf, but it's going to stunt the turf, and it's going to make it darker green. You might get a complaint. The homeowner is going to say, why can't my whole lawn look like that? It's nice and dark green. But this is one of the reasons you want to make a moat and containerize it. Also, you got to be careful of bedding plants, bulbs, perennials underneath the trees that are being planted. And here's an example of tulips. They still flower. They're not dead, but you can see they're probably reduced 50, 60%. So this is another drawback to Cambistat, making sure that you're not overregulating a non-target plant. So keep in mind, I mentioned it's not the magic bullet. You don't want to wait too late. Make sure that the tree's not rapidly declining. And there's some other parts of this equation that have to be addressed. Plant health care, root revitalization, soil decompaction, they all go together and work quite well in harmony. One thing that Rainbow does is that we do provide marketing support. You know, we're out there to help you. We're out there to help you and your technicians do the application correctly, and also we're out there to help you communicate to your clients, you know, all the history and the facts. And we have these fact sheets, and we have a marketing department that can take your company logo, and then we can imprint that logo on some of our fact sheets, as you can see here. That makes your presentation a lot more professional. And so, you know, if you want to see all the cell sheets that we do have available, go to our website, as you can see there in blue, and we can assist you in that method. Now, coming up, and this is something that I work on quite a bit, TrimTech. This is a foliar applied chemostat, paclitabuterol, that is applied to shrubs. In one of my jobs, I do small-scale research trials. I go all around the country working with landscape contractors, working with arborists, and to demonstrate the effectiveness of TrimTech. This is very easy to apply. There's 2 times of year that you would apply it. You would apply it at the very onset of new growth in the early spring, or you apply it 1 to 2 weeks after your shrubs have been sheared or pruned. And so it's very easy to do. It's only locally systemic, where chemostat is systemic throughout the whole plant. This will reduce the pruning frequency, enhances the color the same way that chemostat enhances the color of foliage on trees. This does the exact same thing to the shrubs as well. And so that's what it's all about. It's saving time, saving money, and making plants look a lot better. So I just want to thank you for your time. I want to talk about some of these upcoming webinars, so feel free to take a minute and see if anything here is of interest to you. And you just have to go to our website at treecarescience.com and register like you did for this webinar. And what I'm going to do in a few minutes here, I'm going to go and look at the questions. Hopefully there's some decent questions, and see if we take a few minutes to roll through them. And if I don't know the answer, I will get back to you. And if you could, give me some way of contacting you, I'd be more than happy to do that. Or you can pick up the phone and call me. I'm available, not 24/7, but I'm available most of the time during the business days and business hours to answer your questions. So with that, if you have any questions, write them down. Here's my contact information again, and I thank you for taking your time out of your busy day to attend this webinar. And now I'm going to go and look at some of those questions that we have in the box here. So I'm going to just open that up right now, and I'm looking. And do I see any questions? Let me just take a look. I'm just looking. I do not see any questions. So with that said, oh, there we go. I see someone's question right there. Tony Smith said hello. Hi, Tony. If you have any questions, Tony, you can call me anytime. You know that, except 2 in the morning. Okay, I thank you again for everyone for attending, and please call me if you have any questions. Thank you.